Assalamu alaikum and welcome to Perspective. We'll be talking about, of course, now we've seen that the American troops have deserted, have left the Battleground Air Base. Huge developments in the region in terms of the Americans leaving Afghanistan, Taliban gaining ground. What are the ramifications for Pakistan at this time in terms of for the region also? We'll be talking about that. We'll also be talking about, of course, 2 days ago, the briefing that was given to the National Security Committee, the Parliamentary Committee on the same issue. We'll be talking about that. The political unity, which seems to be the need of the hour at this time. How will Pakistan face these changes? How ready we are? And of course, the option of sealing the border, which the Prime Minister also talked about. How feasible is it for Pakistan? And what can be the spillover effects of the Taliban gaining ground in Afghanistan? All of that today on Perspective. We are joined by Dr. Zafar Nawaz Jaspal, who's a foreign affairs expert. Thank you for being with us today. Javed Rana, who's a senior journalist. Thank you for joining us. And Dr. Jameel Khan, who's a former ambassador. Thank you for being with us. Ji, Zafar Saab, how do you see the developments in the region, considering, of course, the briefing also that happened 2 days ago? What are the spillover effects you think that Pakistan will perhaps need to, insulate? We need to insulate ourselves to what can happen here across the border.
I think that Pakistani leadership anticipated, and as you also referred rightly, that 2 days back we had a meeting on this issue. Keeping in mind there are regional as well as international. There is a lot of complexity in this situation. Which we all are missing. That last time in Afghanistan, when the Soviets left, at that time there was a transformation in the global politics, and it was end of the Cold War, demise of all the great powers. I mean, the Russians and the Americans emerged as a source of a power. But this time, when the Americans are leaving Afghanistan, the global situation is entirely different. It is one of the most, once again, great power competition has started. The containment policy of the Americans, which you heard or which we read in the books in 1947 started, once again now it started. We are hearing in the literature or everywhere, everyone is referring to Sadat trap. That means the Chinese and the Americans show us power competition is unavoidable. And at the same time, Russians are also asserting, and in this context, when we see that these are the trends in the global politics and what is happening within the Afghanistan. Within the Afghanistan, Taliban are playing very, you can say, shrewdly. Why I'm using the word shrewdly? This time they inducted in their ranks Northern Alliance people from the northern areas. Warlords are part of the Taliban. They have also included and giving the, you can say, respectable positions or influential positions to these Hazarajats and all these gifts that the Taliban are this time moving more, you can say, giving the impression rather than religious, sectoral, they are very much having a broader base, and now they are very much confident. Now here, what are the spillovers? Spillover, natural civil war is there, which has started. Intensity will increase, and according to our own Americans and United Nations reports, running government maximum survival is 6 months after September. So in this context, by March 2022, the present setup will be not there, if I go with that report. Second is that when there will be civil war, natural Afghanistan spillover is on our side. Now here, luckily this time we have also a border management. How we manage this spillover. Pakistan can manage it. We can strengthen our force there. We can adopt the Central Asian-like policy. If anybody is illegally crossing, we shoot them. We can be more lethal. And in this context, you have to manage your border for your security. So one is refugees, which we cannot. The most terrible thing is that in Americans integrated, or some people say, oh, as you very rightly pointed out, that the Battleground base is now empty. How we look about, what will be the role of the CIA army in the Afghanistan? This term has been used in the literature, CIA army. Now the CIA army started recruiting in the post when the Soviets came, and after that, but after the 2001, it started growing, like in the form of local police. Then they became merger in the national security sort of thing, and they will be there. So it means that if the CIA army is there, Russians are also there, Chinese will be there, Indians have been integrated. By all means, in the last 2 decades, the state which has more, you can say in addition to Americans are also there now losers as well, but the Indians have a bigger network. So this Indians network will be going to create a lot of problems for us, and one indicator of that was in Lahore blast recently. So the government of Pakistan is tight-lipped, you can say, fingering towards the India or signaling towards the India, but at the same time, we have to also see that if this situation will continue, whether LOC ceasefire will continue or not. So Pakistan will both eastern and western flanks will be very much vulnerable in the coming months, and I think that may be one of the driving force that we have seen, that the leadership was sitting together under one roof for 8 hours and deliberating how to deal with it.
Zafar Sahab, I'm going to go to Javed Sahab, I'll come back to you, but the question now, I think for Pakistan, you know, it's less of leverage within Afghanistan and more about what happens in Pakistan. Isn't that true? I mean, of course, we've had, the Prime Minister has been very categorical with America also. He said that, you know, in terms of air bases, all of that, the stance at this time, I think, is more clearer than perhaps at any other time.
I think there is a huge exaggeration about the scale of the influence that Western countries believe that Pakistan enjoys on Taliban. That's exaggerated. They listen to us. We don't control them. This is a very dark reality, and unfortunately, Pakistan's enemies.
But how much they listen to us now compared to perhaps at an earlier time?
The point is, we should be realistic. If we put more pressure on Taliban, and we should not forget that India has already opened its formal channels with the Afghan Taliban in Doha. So, and Afghan Taliban are furiously independent. The narrative that they have built within their ranks and files is that since they have defeated 51 countries, NATO plus their partners, so defeating Ashraf Ghani government is not a big deal for them. And they are the one who are enjoying parallel good relations in Central Asia, with Russia, with Iran, with Pakistan, with Turkey. They have been acting like a parallel de facto government. There are different estimates. UN says it's a 57% territory they control, but I think more independent assessment is that probably now the territory they are controlling, that's close to 75 to 80%. The fact that within just last 1 month, they have captured more than 50 districts, as per what UN has reported. And the UN is reporting that they have strategically positioned themselves in and around the region of the Kabuls, which means that those districts are the gateway from there they can penetrate into the capital. And now, interestingly, what Americans are saying, they're saying, well, if you need money, we are ready to pay you maybe $2-3 billion. Get it? You need weapons, we are ready to give you weapons. But if you say that we are going to militarily help you, that's not going to happen. Now, there were 2 agreements. One agreement is pretty known to everybody. It's a public document. And there was another agreement. Another agreement was kind of understanding that Taliban and the Americans had reached, and Americans had provided them about their locations where they are stations. One station is that, one part is that they already know what is their public position, locations. But again, that kind of details Taliban had. That is why the Americans were reluctant. They did not carry out as many airstrikes onto the positions of the Taliban as they used to be previously. Americans have the compulsions. They cannot operate from the Central Asian states. They are under pressure from Russia, and they have refused to provide them military bases. So is the case with Pakistan. I think the ground and air agreements that they had with Pakistan, that is most unlikely to be renewed by the Pakistan. So the only option with the Americans is to operate from their aircraft carriers in the Middle East and the Persian Gulf. And they have said they would not operate. So that shows the inability of the so-called superpower, that they can't do much. And they know if they take on the Taliban, the guarantees that they had from the Taliban that they would not allow other terrorist groups, other military groups, Daesh, they are already against them, but more importantly, Al-Qaeda, with whom they had alliance. I think that agreement would not be there. So, now the point I'm trying to make is that the Taliban are the biggest reality now in this part of the world.
And for us, the biggest reality that
for
Pakistan
us,
has to do.
I see a silver lining.
Okay.
Silver lining is that there has already been civil war after 9/11 in Afghanistan. And in that civil war, these terrorist group, Pakistani brand of Taliban, they are being protected by the Indians, by the Afghan government, and I would say supervise that kind of intelligence gained by the Americans. With the return of the Taliban in Kabul, I think these militant groups, these terrorist groups are going to be cracked down. I know it as a reporter, as a journalist, that many a times, many of the terrorist groups, anti-Pakistan terrorist groups, which were supported by the Americans and Indians in Afghanistan, they were killed by the Afghan Taliban.
Okay.
So the point I'm trying to make is that the terrorism that started after 9/11 in Balochistan. You remember, there was no this scale of terrorism by so-called Baloch National Army, these terrorist groups. This all started after 9/11.
Right.
That means
you are saying that this development may lead to a better position as far as
I think this does not abode well for the Indians. It abodes well for us.
Okay, let me come back to
this will bring down the existing scale of the terrorism, and that means the espionage network that India has set up there over the course of 2 decades, that is the most likely to be dismantled.
Right, let me come back to you. I'm going to go to Dr. Jameel with this. Dr. Jameel, how do you see the situation? Do you think that what Javed Rana is saying is do you agree with that? That perhaps this development will be a good thing for Pakistan in terms of the terrorism that escalated post 9/11?
Pakistan is quite concerned. In fact, even while you take a look at what has been revealed from the briefing of the Security Committee in the Parliament, and also what Prime Minister has been saying and what the Foreign Minister has been saying in terms of the critical situation ahead, in terms of challenging situation ahead, and all three, the Prime Minister, the Foreign Minister, and the military, during the military briefing, this point has been reflected. So all these things, if we see, then there are more of our challenges than the opportunities. Now, what are those challenges basically? I will refer to those briefings, and also before I do that, I'll just leave some pointers. And those pointers are American legal authority on Afghanistan in terms of American intervention, or American presence, or American re-resuming the operation. There's a document, there is an agreement between the state of Afghanistan and the United States. In that agreement, signed in 2013, that agreement, whatever government, whoever is in the government, Taliban, coalition or whatever, they cannot really terminate it because the notice given to be given on either side is 2 years notice. That means until 2024, the United States does not have to take permission to enter into a sovereign country, that is Afghanistan, because they are already into an agreement. So what does it mean? It means that if need be, their operation can be resumed, air operation, and there has been statements by the Pentagon and by other entities in the United States, and they clearly say that if need be, we can always enhance our presence there. And that's probably on the basis of that agreement, what I just mentioned to you. That's number one. Number two,
but do you think it's likely, considering the fact that America now wants to leave, and of course this decision to leave was not taken with, Pakistan wasn't taken on board with this. It's a sudden decision by the Americans, and now they seem to want to just, wash their hands off this whole mess.
That's right. I think they are repeating the same thing, what Hillary Clinton once had said in front of the Foreign Relations Committee in Congress, that United States, after winning the war, Cold War, just washed its hand, and she is there on the net or the video also saying that we left Pakistan and others high and dry, and that's why we are facing this difficulty. So yes, to that extent it's right, but the basic point is that can America afford? Can the Biden administration would they be able to face their own people spending trillions of dollars in Afghanistan coming back, and the terrorist groups such as Al-Qaeda and ISIS and other groups, they re-emerged there. And the counter-terrorism operation, that for which they are asking, they had asked the bases from Pakistan, which has very candidly been refused.
Said no.
And rightly so, but then they have the option. There are some indicators which leads us to construe that India can give it in the East Punjab or in Srinagar even. So if they have the same purpose, rather India would be happy. And mind you, India has two very strategic agreements with United States. One is 2016 and the other one is 2018. 2016 agreement gives the privilege to each country, India and the United States, to use each other's bases, to use the facilities, to use the logistics, taking off, landing in, and refueling and re-equipping. All those things are already in place in India. There are many. So my point is, even if Pakistan has not given the basis.
You think that, what Ambassador Saab is saying, that perhaps we're more vulnerable because of India?
No, look, I think that Ambassador Saab is referring a number of the agreements. One cannot disagree, but one has to take into account that those agreements were signed between the Kabul government and the Americans during the last 2 decades, and the Taliban never accepted or admitted the Kabul government as a de jure government. So that those agreements will be interpreted as a de facto government's agreement with the invading, because the Taliban and the Afghans never considered the Americans as they were the invaders there, and that's what Rana Sahib already pointed out earlier, that the superpower lost the war. So if that is the situation, in that agreement is there. Now, second point is India. I think that on the case of India, as I said earlier, India's space have been broadened in Afghanistan. There were 2-3 reasons. One is, in the last 2 decades, entire Afghanistan has recruited civil military bureaucracy, especially the intel that they went to the India for training. Pakistan offered them number of the scholarships that Kabul government was not sending their, you can say, employees or recruits, neither Karzai nor Ghani time, and they were all going to the India, and the Americans were preferring that. So that kind of a trained, 2 decades trained bureaucracy, whether they will be effective or not, they will be there. Number one. Number two, India has a lot of investment in the dams, in these kind of some showpieces. Number three, we have to not forget the Afghans' mentality. Afghans sitting in the Kabul, whether it's the current regime, whether it was historically, since the beginning of 1947 Pakistan was created, or whether in the future Taliban, or even during the Taliban, they always try to prefer their own national interest, as all the regimes do, and on the basis of that, definitely Taliban will be going to blackmail Pakistan by showing the India. That's the reason, even before starting their, you can say, government or takeover of Kabul, they welcomed in the Doha the Indian foreign minister, as it was earlier mentioned by my friend, that the channel is there. So in that context, Indian space will be there. Now we have to see that how it will be monitored. Recently, I think day before yesterday or yesterday, the foreign minister of Russia categorically stated that they have a serious concern over the, you can say, increasing influence of Daesh or Islamic State in the northern part of the Afghanistan, and from there they can go to Central Asia under CIS forces. Russians are very much disturbed. We do agree that IS or the Taliban has a difference of philosophical construct. They have a different, what is their difference? Their difference is that in that context that this Daesh or Islamic State believes in Khilafat and Taliban believes in Amiriyat. So in that context we can find that they are philosophical, but at the same time there are many of the groups, and it's a wrong perception that the Taliban are, though they have a broadened their space, but they have only 157 districts out of 400 districts, and there are many districts in the center of Afghanistan where they are not able to capture. They were recaptured. So in this tug of war, civil war will be brewed, and wherever there is civil war, state like India can play dirty games. And problem with us is, on the one side, we are welcoming of the refugees. We always look at Afghanistan. Normally, our leadership, we would say that Afghanistan is free depth, but for Afghan, we are a strategic depth. So in that kind of this is, and then legally or illegally, Afghans due to this civil war, flow will be here. And in that, the Indian penetration will be not. I do agree that if the Taliban worked, if they promised, but here there is a problem. Our government is also categorically saying that we are not going to support theocracy. We are not going to support one, and that's the reason we have invited the Abdullah and all other the leaders. So how much, though Pakistan has influence, but this influence with the passage of time declining.
And of
as
course,
Prime Minister also said it.
We've said so. The Prime Minister has said so that we don't have that kind of influence.
That is the reality. We have to live with this reality, as earlier Rana pointed out.
And we've told the Americans also, Javed sir, but let's talk about, of course, I mean, whatever one says, whether it's Dr. Zafar or you or Dr. Jamila, I think everyone would agree whatever's happening in Afghanistan is really, Pakistan has to be concerned at the very least about what's happening. In the light of that, how do you see the background, I mean, our own political unity, our own, across the board political parties, political leaders need at this time to put all the differences aside, sit together and concentrate on whatever Pakistan can do at this time to deal with whatever effects, because effects there will be, there are no two opinions on that.
There are two kinds of effects. One are the short term, and the short terms are that maybe few 100,000 Afghan refugees we might have to host again. And there may be more diplomatic pressure on Pakistan to do something to prevent Taliban from taking over Kabul, which of course we cannot prevent that from happening.
Right.
And I think, as Zafar Sahab very rightly pointed out, and very comprehensively pointed out, and many people ignore that, that the Taliban have very smartly now concentrated in the northern part of Afghanistan, and they have recruited leaders from that part. So they are not going to this time around have that kind of resistance in Afghanistan when they will try to capture more territory as they faced previously. So there is going to be civil war, but that civil war is going to end very soon.
Okay.
So in short term, the problems are not.
So do you think Taliban being defeated?
Say it again.
I'm saying with Taliban being defeated, the civil war will end.
The Ashraf Ghani government is going to be defeated for very obvious reasons. Partly, just this is 2-3 years ago, the desertion level within the Afghan National Army was 20%. Now, situation has changed altogether. Wherever they are going, Afghan National Army simply they are surrendering. So they are not facing resistance. And partly it is because of the fact that the Taliban have smartly announced a general amnesty to everyone. So when they know that their life will be protected, so they don't need to fight. So I don't foresee any major resistance for the Taliban if they try to capture Kabul. I've got some information which is very alarming, because there is a negative perception about Taliban, the way they operated last time. The barbers' shops in Kabul, they are reporting that the number of the people visiting them for shave, that has dramatically reduced. That shows the fear of the Taliban. That means the people are getting themselves ready for change of God in Kabul. So let's come to the long-term effects. What was happening when the Taliban were there? There were two things where everybody has a consensus. People may call it a silence of graveyard, but the Taliban established peace in Afghanistan. In 95% territory they held between 1996 to 2001. So they have the ability to establish peace. And they have the ability to administrate justice according to the Islamic law. We had problems at that particular point of time that people living in the tribal area, the bordering region, in the southwest and northwest, they were going there for the administration of their problems. They were seeking justice from their courts, and they were deciding within days and within weeks. We are living in a country, this is a challenge for us. That's just a few years ago, one property case, agricultural property case, was decided by the Supreme Court of Pakistan after 100 years. Started during the British Raj. With this kind of judicial system that we have, which has a lengthy legal process, where unfortunately many lawyers exploit the litigants, judges are not delivering verdicts on time. I think this is going to become a challenge for us. People are going from KPK, from that part, they will cross over to the borders and they will seek their justice. And we need to put our house in order, provide people a speedy justice. This is challenge for us. Other challenges that I think there are elements in Pakistan who are.
So that you see, I mean, that's a whole other. I mean, if you talk about judicial reform, I don't think it's happening tomorrow.
I think this would be different debate, but again, another point that I want to make about. There are people here in Pakistan who are peddling fear. They are saying that the Afghan Taliban are going to protect this Tehrik-e-Taliban. This is a very wrong perception. They never supported any militancy in Pakistan, any terrorism in Pakistan, with no evidence. Talk to the government of Pakistan, they would tell you they always supported the government of Pakistan in the sense that no militant group was allowed by them.
You're saying that that's just, of course, I mean,
so I think our biggest problem of the security would be covered. This 2,600 kilometer long porous border with Afghanistan, that would be secured. We will be in a better position to concentrate on our eastern border with India, something that is a blow to India now, because they have invested financially so much on Afghanistan, also in terms of setting up their espionage operation, in terms of fanning terrorism in Balochistan and the KPK and the rest of the Pakistan from Afghanistan. Now they are shocked and they don't know what is going to happen with them, because certainly Afghan Taliban are going to carry out a crackdown on their hideouts, on the terrorists that they have allowed to stay. That is a problem for them. I think, again, I would say there is a silver lining for Pakistan. We will have a peace in Pakistan and in the region. Yes, there are going to be problems about the perception. Perception about Afghan Taliban, partly true because they were very harsh when they ruled in Afghanistan. I think now they have grown up politically. And I expect then that this time around their governance is going to be far better than previously, and particularly the perception about them that they are so harsh, they are Islamists.
I think I'm going to go to Jameel Saab and I'm going to ask him whether he agrees with your, your rather optimistic take on Taliban being in Afghanistan and their government. Ji, Jameel Saab.
I will just refer to one or two documents. On the 1st of July, there's a document released by the International Risk Group. This is a very renowned NGO, and their reports have been really taken quite seriously. And in that, they have mentioned that Afghanistan, there would be more, they're heading towards a civil war, and plus people are displacing each other, the refugees might as well, there could be an exodus of refugees, and that's what our foreign minister also said, and he used a word in Urdu, Yalgar, means the exodus of the refugees. So, and a couple of more points there. And then one of very important points they have mentioned in that is the re-emergence of Al-Qaeda and Taliban. And Mr. Zafar Rana pointed out, and I would just add to his point, that TTP, yes, TTP was asked to refrain operating against Pakistan interests, and somewhat they were controlled, although the biggest budget has been diverted from the raw towards the elements which were instrumental in carrying out operations in Pakistan and trying to destabilize some of the areas of Pakistan. But Taliban, yes, they were able to assert themselves. But at the same time, we have to realize one thing, that Taliban and the TTP, the Afghan Taliban and the TTP, they have so many common features, and they would not really confront each other to that extent, it appears. And that is also mentioned in the news which has been resonated, the information which has been resonated from the briefing in the Parliament House by our military component. And they also mentioned there are about 6,500 TTP, and they are the main threat, and they might as well start operating from Afghanistan. They might as well find a reasonable ground to do that. Not only that, but in the briefing, the other point which has been resonated, and obviously I take this briefing and the points which has been resonated very seriously, that yes, those are well researched and well articulated point by our military component. So what the other point which is more a matter of concern for us is that if Taliban takes over, the administration, then people, the radical or the people who have been creating disturbance in Pakistan, they might as well get encouraged, and there could be more problems. Not only that, in the same, I would refer to the same briefing, and there has been a word used that chaos being left behind by US in Afghanistan to keep the region unstable as China containment policy. So that is something
so what
which,
do we do, in your opinion, then, to make sure that we can keep our own house safe? We can keep, as far, of course, border management, even sealing the border were some of the options the Prime Minister also discussed. But what are some of the steps you think we need to take now?
I've been working for United Nations for 10 years, and I've headed United Nations component in 6 different countries. So I am quite fully aware of the convention, which is the Refugees Convention, which we signed in 1951, and we ratified accordingly. And then was an additional protocol about the refugees of the 1967. And it becomes very hard for any government, whether it was other countries like Rwanda and like East Timor, like other countries where the refugee problem erupted. It was very hard for the countries where the refugees were trying to push themselves into those countries, because there are those conventions have some binding on the signatories, and there are about 151 signatory countries in it. HCR is the custodian of that in Pakistan, and I think once that starts happening, this barbed wire concertina and the fence what we have laid, probably it will be very hard for Pakistani troops to use the force to the extent of firing. So therefore, it will become a very precarious situation at that time, and that has already been indicated by those who matter in this country in their briefing. So I do not want to really bring in any kind of negative kind of impression, but some of the facts which I thought I should just put it across.
Right.
Okay. Besides that, one thing which I see in the diplomatic arena and diplomatic corps, some of my previous colleagues are still working in Pakistan and elsewhere. The perception which has been created for a variety of reasons that Pakistan, the road to peace in Afghanistan leads through Pakistan, and that perception, and then we have a very good influence on Taliban, and probably will be. That is also covered in the report which I just mentioned to you. So that perception is not really very useful for us, because of that perception.
Right. Let me come back to you. I'm going to Dr. Safdar.
Pressure. We'll start having the pressure from
that the ambassador has talked about. He seems to think that really the situation isn't as rosy as, for example, Javed Saab thinks, in terms of what's happening in Afghanistan. But what about inside and domestically? How do you see the reaction within the country? How do you see the political, like I said, how do you see the reaction in our political leadership, across the board political parties? Do you think that they are on one page as far as this issue is concerned?
I think that this is a reality which all the political leaders, I mean that whether it's PPP, Pakistan Muslim League, PTI, or our establishment, let's put it like this: we have 3 groups. We have a government, we have a opposition, we have a establishment. All of them have one understanding, and there's a consensus. And how I can define the consensus is that if there is a civil war in your neighborhood, its spillover impact are always negative.
Right.
And there will be a negative impact on Pakistan. As you use in the beginning, you use the word ramification, let me put it repercussions.
Okay.
Now in that context, definitely, whether covertly or overtly, you have to take a part. This is a reality. When you take a part, some groups in Afghanistan will define it or interpret it as a benign, some will use it as a, you can say, something called hostile act of Pakistan. Unfortunately, this time West is not on our side, West is on the other side. All the literature which we will be going to read for coming out from the West, it will be blaming Pakistan. So Pakistanis have this realization, so they have to adopt stringent measures at the border, so that there will be lesser and lesser infiltration in the shape of refugees. Second is that how we have to manage this already existing 2.5 million refugees in Pakistan. And third is how we have to counter this narrative in the West that Pakistan is a troublemaker in this region, Pakistan is going to contribute, and above all, how we have to manage this challenge which will be emerging because of the Indians' presence there. The third, besides it, I think that our leadership has realized this, and that's the reason in this 2 days back meeting, they talked about that we need a strategic cooperation with the US. With the strategic cooperation, though I do agree, we do not give them a basis, we do not permit their boots on the ground, but Pakistan need to cultivate some kind of a defense cooperation vis-a-vis Afghanistan. Because if we have this kind of a cooperation, whether our intels are working together, not against anything, but against the terrorist organization, within we can define the parameters. Let's Pakistan and US can work, intels can work together only in the domain of terrorists. So that is the requirement. Otherwise,
do you think the US is open to this kind of strategic partnership?
US has to be opened because Pakistan is not a small state. Pakistan is no more dependent on them for our military survival, and Pakistan is the neighbor, and for their presence in their, because we are just simply thinking that okay, 2,500 troops leave Afghanistan, Americans leave. No, there are 70,000 plus people, American contractors, 3 billion. They just announced to go to the Afghanistan. If the 3 billion US dollars are going to Afghanistan, my point is that American dollar wherever goes, the American national, American interest, American dependence, or American lobby moves with that. So with that, Americans need a cooperation for Pakistan. So we can develop a cooperation, but without undermining our own interest. Our cooperation should be based on national interest rather than an individual interest. This is a very important thing. If you see historically, when in the Cold War, Ayub Khan, when in the Afghan War, Azia, during the start of the war on terrorism, President Musharraf, they were individual military rulers. Now we have been seeing that the political leadership and establishment, I mean civil military leadership, they are on the consensus. This consensus should be further strengthened, and for this consensus we engage the Americans. And then there will be some kind of you can say we are able to minimize the repercussions which will be coming towards us due to the civil war in Afghanistan, and at the same time we continue. Here we have to not forget, while good offices of the Russians in Moscow trilateral dialogue, first time in 2018, Taliban and running government representatives were sitting on the one table.
Right.
So we have to keep in mind that the Russians are very important actors. They are